Hey everyone, this is Derrick Broze with The Conscious Resistance, and welcome to episode 169 of The Conscious Resistance Live. I've got a big show for you today. We are going to cover 5 different stories. Not all of them are going to be super in-depth, but we do have 2 main stories we're going to cover. Today we're going to talk about Mexico, revolution, civil war, or bullshit. The other stories we're going to touch on, an update about Palantir's psycho CEO Alex Karp, Apple announcing digital ID programs and how that continues to roll out in the mainstream and around the world. A little bit of an update on the UN COP30 conference and how Indigenous people are responding to that. And then our final story will be all about Jeffrey Epstein and the latest updates we saw last week with new documents being released and now Donald Trump finally being dragged into supporting the effort to release the Epstein files. We've got all that and more tonight on The Conscious Resistance Live. First off, though, guys, I want to let you know that we are brought to you by Civil. Civil is the podcasting platform and streaming network that I've been partnered with for the last few months, and I am very grateful to work with them because they are voluntarists who believe in individual liberty, they believe in self-ownership, they believe in promoting human respect, and trying to upgrade civilization through all of those principles. You can go to civil.com/TCR, that's CIVL.com/TCR, and you can sign up for their app, for their platform for just $5 a month, guys, $5 a month or $50 a year. And you get access to all of the content they have, documentaries, podcasts, interviews. They have My Pyramid Power series exclusively on there. The final episode coming later this month will premiere exclusively on Civil. My new mini documentary, Liberation 2030, the current 10-week opt-out challenge, all of that and so much more you can get for just $5 a month, $50 a year. So just want to give Civil a big shout out. Again, the website is civil.com/TCR. That's CIVL.com/TCR. So let's go right in and jump into our first story. Let's not waste any time. So you might have seen images like the ones I'm showing on screen right now. I'll just show you this little video clip here. This is some of the surveillance video, CCTV, outside of Mexico's National Palace, where the president, Claudia Sheinbaum, lives and works. And this is a protest of thousands of people gathered in this main square. It's called the Zocalo in Mexico City. And this was part of a national day of protest on November 15th, just happened this weekend. And there were protests all around Mexico, some big, some small. And this protest movement was very much promoted as a Gen Z movement. We're going to talk about that in just a moment, if that's accurate. But what I'm going to talk about today is how images of violence and clashes between the Mexican government, the Mexican police, and the protesters, and let's just be real about it, a small handful of protesters, because if you look at this massive crowd and you look up at the top of the screen, you can see there's some people running and clashing with the police, and there's other videos we'll get into. There's videos like that, and that is what is getting all the attention. Unfortunately, things that aren't really getting the attention are the more peaceful protests, which did take place all around Mexico. We'll show you some of those in a moment. But look at this. This is Alex Jones. Mexico is in full revolt against the communist Chinese-backed president. Battle in Mexico City in the main square, the Zocalo, while patriots battle with police protecting the presidential palace. Officers launch tear gas and bullets. Mexico rises up against Claudia Sheinbaum. Here's some more of the video. Alex Jones promoting it for his own propaganda purposes. And this is people climbing some of the barricades. And what you can see here on the barricade, there are banners that say narco politicians identified, and they're listing different politicians that people believe have connections to the narcos, to the cartels, the drug cartels that do exist in Mexico. And Alex Jones says, a crowd has gathered to protest Claudia Sheinbaum. Now, this part he's actually saying is true. This is before he got all hyperbolic about it. And here you go. Mexico is exploding. The National Palace in Mexico City has been overrun. And this just shows some people fighting the cops. And look, I can't really fault them for wanting to fight the cops. Here's one cop. He gets grabbed and thrown to the ground, and beaten pretty bad. Like somebody's got like a giant tool. You're going to see in a moment, a metal tool, and they're stepping on him. And again, there's a part of me, younger, rebellious me, that's like, yeah, F the cops. But at the same time, this is just senseless violence. This is just mob right here. This is mob mentality. And if you've ever been in a mob, it's not good. So I can't condone this or really support this. But the fact is, these kind of things do happen in Mexico. As I'm going to share, a lot of people just don't understand the history of Mexican politics and and protests, and that this is kind of a normal thing. Mexicans, there's always going to be the extremist, of course. The funny thing is, if this was in the U.S., people like Alex Jones would be calling them Antifa. And here's more from Alex Jones. The populist revolution globally is unstoppable. The National Palace in Mexico is under siege by its citizens with discontent with Claudia Sheinbaum, the WEF puppet, which none of this has anything to do with the WEF. We're going to get into the real reasons. But my point is, like, just to understand people like Alex Jones, and just let's show you. I mean, these videos have 2.2 million views. The original one I was showing you, this one's got 2.6 million views. And then this first one, 4.2 million views. I mean, and then, of course, Jones comes in with stuff like this. President Sheinbaum is a puppet of the BlackRock WEF crime syndicate, and the Mexican people know it. And it's a picture with Claudia Sheinbaum and Larry Fink of the World Economic Forum and, of course, BlackRock. And I want to make it clear, too. Nothing I'm saying today is intended to be a defense of Claudia Sheinbaum. I don't agree with a lot of things she's doing. I'm a journalist, so I'm trying to be as objective as possible, but I'm also an anarchist. I don't support any politicians, Mexican or otherwise. I just don't think that's the solution. But we'll be objective about it. Look, Claudia Sheinbaum, a lot of people support her here in Mexico. A lot of people don't support her. That's politics as usual. But what I find very hypocritical is people like Jones. He's willing to say things like this, but as I tweeted to him and retweeted, this fool is such a psyop promoting the left-right paradigm he used to expose. Does Alex Jones ignore that Trump literally met with Larry Fink this week? And just real quick, just to show you guys what I'm talking about in case you missed it, earlier this week, Trump hosts dinner with Wall Street titans at White House. Private dinner on Wednesday night, including Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan Chase, the NASDAQ CEO, Steven Schwartzman of Blackstone. That's another one of the top 3 investment firms. Morgan Stanley's head CEO, BlackRock's Larry Fink, David Solomon of Goldman Sachs. So, while Alex Jones is out there criticizing Claudia Sheinbaum, Trump, his little pet, is doing the exact same thing. So my main thesis, my main concern, and what we're going to do tonight, the reason I want to focus on this story first, for those who don't know, I live in Mexico. I live in Morelia, Mexico, which is about 4 hours away from Mexico City, where these violent protests took place. There was protests all over the country that were peaceful, and including here in Morelia where I live, there was a big protest of people marching and gathering, and none of it was violent at all. I've been visiting Mexico for going on 9 years now, and I've been living in Mexico for 5 years here in Morelia. So I'm not an expert on Mexican politics by any means. I'm not intending to portray myself as such. But I do think I have a better head on my shoulders and understanding of what's going on than people like Alex Jones. And unfortunately, what we're seeing here is that this is another time when, and I know some of you guys don't like this, but when the mainstream media is doing a better job of reporting than the so-called alternative media. Let's look at what the mainstream media go to CIA, Google, and do a search, Mexico protest Sheinbaum. Top stories, Gen Z protests erupt across Mexico over violence and corruption. And let's just look at some of the headlines that pop up. Thousands protest against government in Mexico City. Clashes leave 120 injured. Protesters rage against Mexico's government over corruption and violence. Mexico's new generation takes to the streets, accusing leaders of protecting cartels. Sheinbaum calls for probe into violence during Capitol protests. That was just this morning, so that's the latest. Mexico's Claudia Sheinbaum targeted by anti-Semitic graffiti. And we'll talk about that too, because some people believe, others are falsely portraying this as like, this is a revolution because she is a Jewish woman, secular Jew, in a country that is, mostly Catholic, like largely Catholic, majority Catholic. And so people are like, okay, she comes from this small Jewish community in Mexico City of powerful, wealthy Jews. And of course, the people who are just singularly focused on the Jews, they just seize on that and focus on that. And so there was one tagging, some people tagged, they probably won't even show it because they're afraid to show it. But you can see kind of in this picture here at the top, it says Puto Julio. So they're calling her Puta Julia, Jewish whore is what they're calling her. And that was just one tagging, though, out of thousands of people. And there's, a Jewish star over here with an X through it. Yes, there's definitely a very much anti-Israel sentiment going on in these protests. We're going to kind of look into some of the reasons for the protests. But I just see so many false narratives. And again, I hate to say it, but the corporate media is doing a better job than the majority of the so-called independent media, or just random idiots on Twitter who have millions of followers, unfortunately, who are saying civil war is erupting in Mexico, revolution erupting in Mexico. It's very frustrating, and I hate it. So last night, while I was shopping for couches, I posted this video across social media. If you follow me, you saw it. I've said no revolution or civil war happening in Mexico. And I just did like a quick, honestly, it was a tongue-in-cheek kind of silly video of me. Hey, here I am. I'm at the mall shopping for couches with my dog and my partner, and we're living our normal life. There's no violence happening everywhere. There's no civil war or revolution erupting in Mexico. It was a couple hours of violent protests in one city in a massive country. And not even that. Mexico City has 21 million people, and you only had thousands of people protesting. And so it's kind of silly. In fact, here's a view of the day after the protest. There was a big dance festival happening in the Zocalo, in the same place. So this is where all those violent protesters were. And literally 24 hours later, in front of the palace, is just people out there dancing and, having a good time. So this whole garbage that there's just this revolution that broke out everywhere. And look, here's a live feed of the Zocalo in CDMX in Mexico City. Let's go live right now. Looks like they're preparing for some kind of concert or something based on what I can tell here. Here, let's go ahead and make that a little bigger. And people like Alex Jones and others are irresponsibly claiming Mexico City is in a revolution, it's in a full revolt, it's in whatever. And look at this. This is a town square. Things are chill. There's nothing going on. The protests haven't continued. It's not still happening everywhere. It's just people going about their lives in Mexico City. So there's just so much garbage on Twitter, especially, but all over the internet, because I've seen this with people talking about this on Facebook and elsewhere. And I'm guessing if you're anywhere on social media over the last 24 or 48 hours, you've seen something like that. And so let's get into the real reasons for the protests. So if you follow my work, you know that last week I went downtown to the Centro here in Morelia for a protest against violence. This was a call for a day of protest against violence around the country. It wasn't as large as some people hoped. This was on November 8th. And activists in Morelia, they marched against violence. And I went there, as you can see here on screen. I interviewed some of the protesters. There's a small crowd of people. They marched through the streets. There were signs against Israel, as you can see there. There was people waving communist flags. There was people waving LGBTQ flags. It's a mix of issues and agendas. And I interviewed 3 different protesters. One of them was an older gentleman, you can see right here. One was a younger dude, and one was a younger lady, and got their perspectives on why they were there. And these protests largely came after the fact that there was an assassination 2 hours away from Morelia is a town called Uruapan. And Uruapan is Western Michoacan, the state that I live in. And so all of the avocados you eat anywhere in the world are largely coming from this state and very close to where I live, from all the farms here. And of course, the cartels, you probably have heard, have got involved in that industry, and they are extorting farmers, and a lot of people are sick of it. So in Uruapan, which is one of the major areas where limes are grown and avocados are grown, this mayor, his name was Carlos Manzo, he was elected mayor just last year. And he was openly running. Not only was he running against the cartels, but he was running as an independent. He wasn't part of the leading Morena party, which Claudia Sheinbaum, the president, is, and the former president AMLO was a part of. He was running just completely independent and saying, we're going to do something about the cartel violence. He was actually, you can find documentaries about him on YouTube of him going out with his local police force. And not only was he standing up against the cartel and putting his body and obviously his life on the line, he was also talking crap to Claudia Sheinbaum and saying, why is the federal government not sending support here? Why are we not giving help in these different ways? And that was kind of ongoing. That has been building up while he was while he was in office. He's going out there, he's fighting the cartels and calling out Claudia Sheinbaum for not, doing enough. And so all this has been building over months. And let me just switch views real quick. And then we got to the point where he was assassinated, as I cover in this report. On November 1st, on the Day of the Dead, he was assassinated by, as we've now found out, a 17-year-old meth addict has been identified as Uruapan's mayor assassin. This was reported just last week. That's Carlos Manzo on the left side of the screen. You can see him with a bulletproof vest. And unfortunately, this young man, Victor Manuel Ubaldo Vidales, has been identified as the shooter. Now, who knows if that's accurate or if they're just kind of blaming it on him. But that's what the story was, is that the cartels got this young dude who was addicted to meth, and maybe he was addicted prior to that. Maybe they got him addicted to meth, because other reports that I found show that some of the cartels, they do try to recruit young people who are poverty stricken and try to either get them into drugs or, put drugs into their system and then make them go do things like this. Some other information has come out. The murder of Carlos Manzo, a killing bearing the hallmarks of the Jalisco New Generation cartel, a hitman linked to the CJNG, shot dead at the mayor of Uruapan, who had arrested the group's leader in August. So Carlos Manzo had arrested a local leader of the Jalisco New Generation cartel, which is one of the most violent cartels that has been growing in Mexico the last couple of years. You've probably seen videos of them. They're heavily armed, heavily militarized, and that makes people very sketchy, very curious about them, and they seem sketchy. Well, according to this report, it says a source close to Manzo, consulted by El País, which is this outlet here, and knowledgeable of regional politics, explained that the leader, his name was Rene Belmonte, who had the nickname of Reno, was a subordinate of two other brothers who were in the highest ranks of the Jalisco New Generation cartel, and who have also been linked to the Party of the Democratic Revolution, or the PRD, here in Mexico. And so this is just one news report. I'm not saying it's fact, but according to this outlet, which I've found to be pretty reputable, they're saying that the killing was linked to the Jalisco New Generation cartel. That wouldn't be a surprise to a lot of people. Now, let me go ahead and show you this report from Covert Action magazine from back in 2021. The latest bizarre chapter of War on Drugs. U.S. Special Forces train drug cartel enforcers linked to rape, torture, and decapitation of victims. So this is another piece of the puzzle. The Jalisco New Generation cartel has been one of the most feared paramilitaries in Mexico over the last decade. Images of the group have become the standard depiction of the Mexican cartels. Their propaganda videos often feature groups of masked men with enough small arms to make them formidable even against conventional armies. And here's a little picture. You can see them very well armed and military gear and everything. And it says, in an interview aired on Mexico's Telemundo network in May 2019, a former Jalisco New Generation cartel soldier described his experience at a training camp and claimed that the cartel employed U.S. Special Forces to train their recruits. According to the former Sicario assassin, there were Marines, there were Navy from the U.S., there were Delta Force, there was everything there. And so this is a cartel dropout kind of detailing how he says that they were actually trained by U.S. Special Forces. All of the links I'm showing you guys are going to be in the show notes. I covered this one last week, but I just want to kind of add that to your perspective here, that this is kind of what's going on in the background. So let's just kind of recap briefly here. You have a mayor elected to one of the most violent parts of Mexico, Michoacan, which is where I live, but it's not violent everywhere. Don't buy the propaganda. But in Uruapan and parts of the western state, it certainly is. So Carlos Manzo gets elected. He runs on a very strong anti-cartel campaign. He's running independent. He's talking crap about Claudia Sheinbaum, saying they're not doing enough. And then on Day of the Dead, November 1st, he is assassinated. That assassination appears to be linked to the Jalisco New Generation cartel. And because of that, marches immediately popped up. The day after his assassination, people came here to Morelia, which is the capital of Michoacan, 2 hours away from Uruapan. Citizens from Uruapan and Morelians came downtown, and they had a huge protest too. I covered this last week as well. And there was some violence at those protests. Again, a small group of people started to break down the doors of the governor's palace here in Morelia. Some people got inside, they smashed computers, they set fire to things, and that made the news as well. So that was kind of just the initial immediate reaction, as people were just like pissed off, and they had this big protest. Then the following weekend, last weekend, October 8th, as I said, there was another protest. It was just called a protest against violence, and it was against the cartel violence. It was against the genocide in Gaza. It was kind of a mix of different issues, and maybe a couple hundred people showed up for that one. It wasn't that big, but all of that led to calls for a nationwide protest on November 15th. And that's what we saw happen this weekend. So there was protests in Mexico City. There was protests in Oaxaca, in Morelia, and other parts of Mexico. And yes, this was very much promoted as a Gen Z kind of protest. And it is true. There are Gen Z. I follow some people on TikTok and Instagram that are Mexicans. They look like they're in their 20s, early 20s. And they have been speaking out, and they were in attendance, and people were rightly upset about the cartels and feeling like Claudia Sheinbaum, as well as some of the other politicians, are not doing enough, or even more specifically, are in the back pocket of the cartel. So that is very real. So that's kind of what led up to this weekend's action in Mexico City. And as I said, people like Alex Jones and some of these really crappy people in so-called alternative media, which I think are really serving a bigger agenda, tried to play it up as like, this is Mexico's civil war, there's a revolution happening. And I kind of take it personally. I'm not Mexican born and raised. I was born in Texas. My family's from Mexico 4 generations back. But I live here, and I do care, of course, about truth as a journalist and just as a person who cares about truth. And it's frustrating to see so many people misrepresent what's actually taking place. So let's go ahead and continue here. As I said, we have to consider that the Jalisco New Generation cartel, Jalisco New Generation cartel is linked to the U.S. Special Forces, that they may have had training. This isn't the only report you can find as well. I'll show you more. But let's go ahead and look a little bit closer. So here's some of the things I'm also seeing on social media. This guy says, Gen Z mob strikes again, target Mexico, evidence so far who is behind it. U.S. NAD funded media like Animal Politico and U.S. NED Democracy Award winner and former Mexican President Vicente Fox are openly promoting the protests organized on mainly U.S.-based social media platforms, as per verified U.S. engineered guerrilla revolutions elsewhere this year, including Nepal, and dating back to the Arab Spring in 2011. So the basic implication here is that this entire protest movement is organized by U.S. Western interest, and it's not legitimate. That's essentially the message that people want to get. And what I respond to this is like, I'm sorry, but these types of takes are retarded, and they're an oversimplification of Mexican politics. I love how everyone's an expert on Mexico all of a sudden. And then, as I said, there are concerns about a color revolution. And what's meant by a color revolution is that it's a false flag revolution, that they're kind of flying. Like there was some of these revolutions, alleged revolutions happening during the Arab Spring. They have been called the Orange Revolution, the Pink Revolution, things like that. So people just call them the color revolutions. And many of those movements were indeed linked to U.S. and Western interests. But both things can be true. There are concerns about a potential color revolution, and people are genuinely upset about cartel violence. Those things are both true. But what frustrates me about what we're seeing here in Mexico, but also about, for example, the No Kings protest in the U.S., is that people like to use these claims and say, oh, it was funded by this billionaire, or is funded by far right-wing people or far left people. And then the idea, or the hope, I guess, is that will shut down all sympathy. And so the masses just won't care. They won't pay attention and say, oh, well, whatever, I'm not going to support that movement. It's just funded by George Soros. Oh, I'm not going to support that movement. That's just a bunch of Gen Z bullshit funded by right-wing interests, which is what the Mexican government has claimed. And we're going to get more into some of those complications in a moment. And I really just don't like this, because I think we should be able to be discerning, critically thinking people and say, okay, are these movements legitimate? Do they have funding from outside sources? And are people genuinely upset? And the answer is yes, people are genuinely upset. As I went to the protest and showed you guys in my recent report when I interviewed some of the protesters, and I didn't get to make it to Mexico City this weekend, but I guarantee you if I went there, we would talk to people, and many of them would say that they are upset with cartel violence. So this idea that the entire thing is just funded and engineered by, the NED and the CIA and et cetera, I really do take offense to that. That's not to say that's not a potential. That's not a possibility. So I want to make that clear of what I'm saying here. I'm not dismissing that just offhand entirely. I'm just saying it's frustrating when we have people who are very dismissive of the genuine and real frustrations and concerns of the Mexican people in this case. So let's go ahead and start checking out what was claimed now. This is from a Mexican outlet here. Generation Z March is organized by groups on the right. This is what Claudia Sheinbaum started saying in the days before the protest, literally like the day before the protest. Her and her organization, which is called Infodemia, as I'll show you here, they held a press conference and they put together this presentation where they basically said that this entire movement, this March of the 15th, I'll show you the English translation here. They're saying that this call for the March 15th in the Gen Z, based on a digital analysis, it was inorganic and it was paid. There was bots being funded by the international right. Social media accounts from around the world were pushing this. And that's not to say, again, this can't happen. I feel like I have to keep repeating myself here because some people are going to say, oh, come on, Derrick, you're being naive. But they claim here that there's evidence that members of the other political parties, the opposition political parties from the Morena party, and even businessman Ricardo Salinas have used Gen Z and jumped on this campaign. So that was what the head of Infodemia was claiming at the press conference held just last week. And they released this digital analysis. So let's go ahead and look at their digital analysis. So here they go. It says, an analysis presented by the head of Infodemia shows that the origin of the digital campaign can be identified on October 3rd, when Azteca Noticias published a report linking Mexican youth protests to an alleged global movement. Because as I'm going to show you guys in a moment, there have been worldwide protests taking place around the world that are being called Gen Z protests, and many of them are linked to a very particular flag, what's called the One Piece flag or the Jolly Roger flag. We'll talk about that in a moment. So what they're claiming is that on October 3rd, first you see Aztec Noticias reporting about the Gen Z global protests. And then you have this influencer, Carlos Bello, who until then had not addressed political topics, participating in a forum where he openly criticized the government of Mexico. And then on October 7th, Ricardo Salinas, owner of Grupo Salinas, shared Bello's post, the other guy, the influencer, on social media with a defiant tone, a post that was replicated by the influencer himself. So they're basically saying, like, it seems like it's all feeding into each other. Of course, we should mention that Salinas, this billionaire they're talking about, he does own TV stations. I believe he owns TV Azteca. And so they're saying that this billionaire, who is in opposition to Claudia Sheinbaum and the current ruling party of Mexico, that he was behind funding and boosting some of these messages. So let's go on further. The next one they show are just more pictures, and they're kind of tracking like how they say this started back in October. It even started in August 2024. Retweet. So they're claiming like this is like a long game that they've been building, promoting this for months or for over a year. And then they even claim that they're using AI generated images, and they're paying influencers on TikTok to promote it. And so I will link all of this for those of you who speak Spanish or read Spanish and you want to read through this. Here's another thing that says, this is Miguel Angel Olorza stated that after the call for the march on November 15th was made public, 179 accounts on TikTok and 359 communities on Facebook were detected that began to promote the Gen Z information in a synchronized manner. 50 of the 179 TikTok accounts had their first post in October or November, which tells us that they were created specifically to simultaneously promote this topic. So there's brand new accounts popping up. And again, this stuff does happen. I argue with accounts all the time online, and I realize, oh my God, this person's literally just created yesterday. This is probably a bot from a troll farm. Could be Israel, could be China, could be the US, who knows? And so they're basically saying that they were created at the same time. 359 accounts analyzed on Facebook, which promoted the call for November 15th march, began posting about Gen Z on October 26th. 28 of these accounts had foreign administrators, and he says it is a movement that is driven from outside of Mexico. Miguel Angel Olorza detailed that from October 16th to the 26th, it was mentioned as a peaceful march to revoke Claudia Sheinbaum. However, starting from October 27th, AI generated images of the government palace on fire began to publish, and from November 1st, after the homicide of Carlos Manzo, the communities and pages synchronously changed the reason for the march around this event, relevating the mandate revocation to the background. So they're basically saying that they have clear evidence that this movement is kind of popping up and seemingly organized, and it's coming from outside of Mexico, using Facebook, using TikTok, and that the movement only kind of switched to focusing on Carlos Manzo at the last minute. He explained that internal conflicts began to emerge starting November 1st among the promoters of the November 15th call, when the user Ivan Mero Pero, administrator of the Gen Z's original Discord server, denied the call and rejected any link to an X account that interacts with figures from the PAN party and the opposition. So basically saying there's some internal conflict within the organizers of the event itself. And then on November 3rd, this same man shared the call for November 8th march over the insecurity crisis in Mexico, calling it the first official mobilization. So that was the November 8th march I went to here in Morelia. On November 10th, he announced that they would change the social media accounts of IG, TikTok, and X for Gen Z. So then the Infodemia, the organizer here, the official from the Mexican government, he started pointing at people who he said are promoting the marches. Vicente Fox, who's a former president of Mexico, Claudia X Gonzalez, Sociedad Civil Mexico, Action Civil Mexicana, and then the use of the one piece flag in the Chamber of Deputies by one of the other parties. So he's saying like there's these subtle signs and hints that this is all kind of being coordinated by opposition parties and opposition candidates. And he also pointed out that the links between the march's callers and the businessmen, Ricardo Salinas, through right-wing influencers like Arturo Herrera, a sympathizer of Salinas and collaborator of Derecho Diario Mexico, a media outlet that also promoted disinformation. So they go on from here. I don't need to read. This is, kind of a long thread. And they are, showing what they consider to be evidence and links between these different groups and links between Salinas, the billionaire. So their whole claim, though, is that the entire march was just fabricated. Here's where it gets a little interesting. They explain that the digital campaign was coordinated and promoted with the support of the international right and its companies with foreign bots and various profiles with business and media ties, including the Atlas Network, which is a organization which does have some Koch brothers funding, which claims to be libertarian-ish, and Ricardo Salinas is linked to them. So they're saying the Atlas Network was linked to a smear campaign in 2024 against the previous president, AMLO, and now President Claudia Sheinbaum. Atlas Network is led by Roberto Salinas, cousin of businessman Salinas, the other guy they've been mentioning. His media and business group influence extends to spaces within Grupo Salinas. The Atlas Network boasts its network of 500 think tanks that span the world, like the one that operated against Pedro Castilla in Peru or Evo Morales in Bolivia. They are also behind battles taken to the judicial arena. So they're basically just saying that this all goes back to the Atlas Network, and that this Atlas Network is connected to Salinas, and they're funding it, and they're using bots, and they're using AI. And so they go on and go on. But that's basically the claims of this. And of course, they also talk about Javier Milei in Argentina being a part of this. It says that this is the international right-wing activist who promoted the digital campaign. And they say the man named Eduardo Menoni is a content creator, critical of progressive governments, participate in the network of Hispanic influencers who spread anti-state and anti-communist discourses. He has been active against the fourth transformation, which is what they call what the current party calls their movement, and has promoted the marches. So it really goes on from there, but they're basically just trying to say it's this network of influencers. They spent 90 million pesos. And so I will link all that in there for those who want to read that and want to dive in deeper. Now, here's a little bit more of a look. I want to show you guys about Salinas, this is the guy that they're blaming everything on. Ricardo Salinas Piego, who's the chairman of Grupo Salinas. Just this last week, literally right before the protest, the Supreme Court of Mexico rejected legal measures from his companies and the conglomerate, and basically said that he has to pay up his debt, which is apparently $2.6 billion. The court ruled against 7 of the 9 legal remedies, similar to an injunction filed by his companies. It did not yet rule on the other 2. The debts date for more than a decade. The decisions cannot be appealed. But Grupo Salinas, the conglomerate, and Mexico's tax authority could reach an agreement. So Salinas is a TV, retail, and banking magnate and is one of the current administration's most outspoken critics. So the reason I'm bringing this up is you got to understand this. This is what people like Alex Jones and others who are just doing hot takes on Mexico can't really grasp and don't understand, is that Claudia Sheinbaum, the president, who does have some popularity and support, but also is increasingly unpopular because people see her as tied to the cartels, she and her administration are saying it's this guy, this billionaire, who is funding these protests through his network tied to the Atlas Network. And at the same time, the Supreme Court of Mexico has ruled against him and is basically saying that he's the one funding this whole thing, and the Supreme Court is trying to make him pay his debts. And so what I'm trying to get you to understand is that there's a lot more going on in the background, that this is actually, in many ways, this is kind of like, let's just put it in the United States terms that people might understand. Imagine there's a massive protest movement against Trump. Like the No Kings protest. And Trump, as president, says, this is not a legit movement. This is not Gen Z. It's tied to this billionaire who doesn't like me, who's tied to these other political parties. Let's say George Soros or his son. That's essentially what Claudia Sheinbaum is doing. She's the politician, the president in power. She's pointing to a billionaire who's in opposition to her and saying he's the one that's funding this movement. And there probably is, and it appears to be, some truth to that claim. But again, does that mean that there is no legitimate concern or frustration from the people? No, it doesn't. But it also doesn't mean, as Alex Jones claimed, that this is an uprising by the people against Mexico's communist president. Unfortunately, communism and socialism are kind of popular in most of Mexico and Latin America. So that has nothing to do with that at all. And here's just another bit of context. Salinas, he just met with El Salvador's President Bukele, who's obviously very controversial, who I don't really support. A lot of libertarians have fallen for this guy, but he's an authoritarian who has used his violence and his kind of iron fist in order to make El Salvador a much safer country. Without a doubt, he has made the country go from being one of the most dangerous to being one of the safest, but he had to do so in very controversial ways. Well, as Salinas is getting this ruling from the Supreme Court where they're saying he needs to pay up billions of dollars, and as he's being blamed for organizing protests in Mexico, he's over there meeting in Bukele, and he's basically saying, kind of taking up a similar approach, saying, we need to take what Bukele's doing. He says this, he's a true ship captain who knows how to navigate all seas and deliver results, not like the inept and corrupt Gobierno Nicolas we have in Mexico. He called them cave dwellers or cavernicolas. He says he coined that term. And he said that if it was up to him, if he was president, he would make Mexico the number one priority would be to use the same tactics that Bukele did in El Salvador, to quote, declare war on all the criminals and to use the full force of state to immediately restore order in the country with the aim of giving Mexican families a peaceful life. Now, look, I'm not saying this guy would actually do that, but that's at least what he's claiming. So this guy, Salinas, who's meeting with Bukele, is speaking very vocally against the cartels, and he's speaking very vocally against the current president and the current ruling party, Claudia Sheinbaum and Morena. And so a lot of this is really just political back and forth that people just don't seem to grasp. They see Mexican protesters violently protesting in one city of a massive country. Again, Mexico City has 21 million people, and you had 1,000 people protesting and maybe, less than 100 being violent. And people see that and they're like, civil war. Alex Jones spins it as a civil war against the communist-backed, Chinese-backed president. Other people are claiming that this is, a false revolution being funded by the CIA, the NAD, and the president herself is saying that it's all being funded by bots and AI. As you can see here from Bloomberg, bots, billionaires behind Gen Z march in Mexico, Sheinbaum says. This was right before the march happened. So there's a lot of different pieces going on here. It's not as simple as a lot of people would like to believe. Now, for the final section of this Mexico story, what I want to focus on is looking at the claims that there is indeed a color revolution going on. Now, the Mexican president, she's blaming it on this billionaire Salinas and foreign interests tied to the right-wing, international right-wing movement that are anti-communist and anti-state. That's one claim that's being made. The next claim I'm going to look at is a little different because it does go back to this idea that this is a foreign-funded, maybe NED, USAID, CIA-funded color revolution, and that is largely due to the presence of this flag, which is called the One Piece flag. And now let's go ahead and check this out. This is coming from Gizmodo, the de facto flag of Gen Z. What the One Piece flag is doing in Mexico during protests. It's being used around the globe by protesters. You can see it right there. And here I'll show you this. This was the Mexican palace right there. And as you can see, they rolled out a giant flag that has this skull and crossbones with the little hat. Again, some people would call that Jolly Roger, but it's based on this manga, this anime comic for the uninitiated that is called One Piece. So let's look at what this article says here. It says, why were Mexican Gen Z protesters flying an anime flag featuring a straw-hatted skull and crossbones on Saturday? Protests erupted in multiple cities in Mexico this weekend. Reuters noted Mexico City people wearing hoods apparently tore down structures protecting the palace. Over on right-wing cable news Fox and Friends, they welcomed two besuited Spanish-language podcasters who furnished the American news consumer with the claim that Mexico is experiencing a national awakening against its leftist president. They cited the killing of the anti-cartel mayor, Carlos Manzo, as the cause, and they said they would welcome a foreign military invasion. That's a big concern of mine as well, is how people are using this to spin for the U.S. to come out here and save Mexicans. So if you want one tidy, unifying cause for the protest, I would wait until the dust settles. But if you want a unifying symbol, you could do a lot worse than the Jolly Roger flag, which we're all over. So what are the politics of One Piece? And this is where we can actually learn where it comes from. One Piece 101. This is a YouTube video. If you want to watch it, you can learn more about it. Just look up The World Nobles Explained, One Piece 101. One Piece has one of the sprawling textual universes that is appealing to content hyper consumers and intimidating to casuals precisely because it's so huge. The protagonists are a bunch of plucky pirate adventurers and formerly called the Straw Hat Crew, and they often have traumatic backstories. Their leader, Monkey D. Luffy, often seems guided by the principle of freedom, but he also wants to be a pirate king, which makes him an eccentrically defined form of freedom, the freedom to just hang out with his cool friends and go on fun adventures. There are a lot of fights in One Piece, and they aren't all tied to the pursuit of freedom or the related pursuit of victory over injustice, but they often are. In particular, the Straw Hats fight the global warlords known as the World Nobles, who are one of those cabals of palace-dwelling, decadent, cruel tyrants you see in the fictional worlds of comics and things like this. So who are the protesters using the One Piece flag? Well, these protesters are in Mexico, as I said, but it also has been cited in many other places. It says Carlos Manzo, who was infamous for wearing a straw hat, wearing a little Mexican cowboy style hat, which was placed in his casket. Protesters in Guadalajara, they hosted a giant straw hat during their march, and you've seen it elsewhere. And we've also seen it in other countries. So that's a little bit about the One Piece thing. Southeast Asian politics researcher Kurniawan Arif Masbul tracked the One Piece phenomenon to late July when it started being used in that country in what country? In Indonesia, as a general purpose protest flag. He observed the following in the local media. A truck driver from East Java told a local outlet that he hoisted the flag because life is getting harder and Luffy fights injustice. That's what we feel too. Others in university interviews called the flag a symbol of honesty and bravery against an oppressive system, noting that the national flag felt more ceremonial than meaningful for them. And then it was used in the Philippines shortly after that in September. And according to a 23-year-old organizer who talked to The Guardian, he said, quote, "We see the flag as a symbol of liberation against oppression, that we should always fight for the future we deserve." So that's kind of some of the background. That's a little bit of the mainstream perspective, right? And just to give you another view, you can see here the flag is, and they took it and kind of made it a little bit more Mexican with a mustache and a sombrero over it. This flag is popping up everywhere. And now I want to point to my friend James Corbett's report that he did back in early October, Your Guide to a World on Fire. And this is James kind of catching up with all these different so-called Gen Z protests happening around the world. He talks about Indonesia, France, Kenya, Madagascar, Morocco, Nepal, Peru. And if you're paying attention, you're starting to see that the One Piece flag is everywhere. Philippines, Serbia, and then obviously Mexico. So what James says here, and I want to point out, I don't 100% agree with everything James says here, but I think it is worth considering. So he says here, have you noticed any thread that connects to these various protest movements? I mean, besides the lamestream media's shameless deployment of generational psyop and their incessant labeling of Gen Z protesters, Gen Z rage, you may have noticed a ubiquitous symbol that is apparently spontaneously showing up at these rallies, the One Piece Jolly Roger flag, which we just talked about. So he goes through and gives a little description. So how did this very particular symbol get picked up and used as a symbol of revolt in far-flung youth-led marches around the world, from Peru to the Philippines, Nepal, France, Morocco, Indonesia, and Mexico? And he says, according to these pieces, it's just, and people are waking up, and it represents a symbol of the people standing up against power, much like the Guy Fawkes mask was a symbol for millennial protests during Occupy Wall Street. And so James says, there you go. Of course, for those who are familiar with the history of the cookie-cutter mass-manufactured protest movements known as color revolutions, in which protesters all spontaneously decide to sport the same color at their marches and rallies to create a type of branding for a spontaneous people's uprising, you might know better. If you follow the thread of the color revolution plot, commencing in Serbia in 1990s and continuing to spread through Ukraine and Georgia and other geopolitically sensitive hotspots in the 2000s, you'll know the shady NGO funding behind such plots. It doesn't take an analytical genius to suspect that there may be some similar forces behind the spontaneous adoption of this particular symbol by Gen Z protest movements around the world. So he makes that claim, right? But here's an important point that I'm glad James made. Still, it is far too politically naive to say that every protest movement that happens is a synthetic phenomenon spun out of a whole cloth by shadowy forces. While protest movements certainly can be organized and steered by nefarious actors, large rallies and marches do not materialize out of the ether because of dollars and deep state wishes alone. They are representations of a genuine resentment from the masses. It isn't difficult to see why young people around the world would be fed up with the status quo in the respective countries. Government corruption is endemic. Nepo kids flaunting their wealth while the people struggle to make ends meet is galling. Kickbacks and grift resulting in shoddy, crumbling public infrastructure is the stuff revolutions are made of. And as has been pointed out recently, young people around the world are faced not only with abnormally high food prices, but also with staggering unemployment rate. Combine those troubles with the world in which the future is increasingly set to be dominated by robots, drones, and other AI-powered automatons, it isn't hard to understand why young people feel they have nothing to gain from going along to get along in this rigged and failing system. So James is acknowledging that there are legit reasons for people to protest, but at the same time, recognizing that we should be skeptical of these types of symbols which pop up everywhere and wondering if they are part of something bigger. So now that this symbol has made its way to Mexico, we have to ask ourselves, is this a genuine protest movement that has popped up organically, or is it a case of a CIA, NED, USAID funded color revolution, or is the Mexican president right and it's being funded by right-wing networks that are in opposition to her? Because as I said earlier, the Morena party, which she is part of, currently has control of the courts. They recently held a vote which was promoted as more freedom for the people because you're going to get to vote on the judges. But what it actually did was allow her party, Morena, to get more control of the court systems. And they largely have control of, the military forces under their control. And there's definitely some cartel connections. So, of course, any politicians and political parties who are speaking out against them, they're going to want to say, no, don't trust these people. They're shady in all these bad ways. And so she tried to do that and say, don't trust this Gen Z protest movement. It's all about trying to, make me look bad and make Mexico look bad. And it's tied to all these bad people. That's essentially what it comes down to. You have some people like ignorant people like Alex Jones claiming this is the people rising up against the communist government. You have the president of the country saying this is being funded by right-wing interests. And then you have the people who are against her saying, no, we're upset because there's cartel violence that's not being addressed. And one example is the assassination of Carlos Manzo, who tried to speak up. And then to add more on top of all of that, you've got the presence of the Jolly Roger Gen Z One Piece flag, which seems to be popping up in protest movements around the world. So clearly things are a bit more complex than we're being told. It's not just as simple as saying there's a civil war in Mexico, there's violence in Mexico, there's a revolution, which is obviously not happening. At least there's not violence happening in the streets of Mexico City or Morelia or any of that right now. There have been incidents of violence at certain protest movements over the last few weeks. But things are more complex than people want you to see. I've just spent 40 minutes explaining this and breaking this down to you. That's how much time it takes, in my view, to actually be able to get people to understand the nuances here and the critical thinking that is necessary to really understand what's happening. So I know this was a long report, and I will be making clips of this so you can share, but please do send this video to your friends and family and try to get them to understand what's really going on instead of just buying into garbage they see from influencers on social media. All right, before we jump into our next story, let's go ahead and tell you more about Civil, guys. As I mentioned, Civil is the podcasting platform streaming network that I've been partnered with, and we're doing lots of different work together. The main thing I'm really excited about is very, very soon I'm going to be releasing the final piece of the Pyramid of Power, episode 17, volume 2. But before that even comes out, you can go to civil.com/TCR. You can sign up there. You can get access to the entire series. You can watch it from your TV, from your tablet, from your phone. And they have their content that I haven't released anywhere else, including an interview with G. Edward Griffin, interview with James Corbett, and many other pieces of content that I've put together there that haven't been released anywhere else. We've also got Liberation 2030, which is my new documentary film, which is exclusively available on Civil right now. And then, as I mentioned as well, we're doing this 10-week opt-out series, which has been really cool because this has been the deepest dive that I've done. Last week, we did how to opt out of big tech, and before that, it was how to unbank yourself. I mean, I'm going super deep, and it's exclusively only on civil. I think this is very important information, and it's only $5 a month. It's only $50 a year if you want to sign up there. If you decide to do the annual subscription, you can get a discount on that using the code TCR20, TCR20, and you'll get 20% off your annual subscription. Again, go to civl.com/TCR, and you'll find this landing page with all the details you need to learn more about what I'm doing over at Civil. And they are supporting me, guys, so please support them so they know that they should continue to work with me and we can continue to promote human respect and upgrading human civilization. All right, let's go ahead to our next story, guys. I have a new article series out right now. As you're listening to this, it should be live, but it's not live as I'm recording. It's called the Technocratic Trump Administration. So far it's 3 parts. This latest part is just being published today. I've done 2 parts already. One is about Trump and the public-private partnerships and his connection with the big technocrats, meeting with them at the White House. The second one was focused on the consolidation and pressuring of the media, whether we're talking about what's been going on at the Pentagon or the purchasing of TikTok. And that's where this one picks up. It's called The Zionist Infiltration Expands. In the first 11 months of his second term as president of the United States, Donald Trump has left no doubt that he is committed to a Make Israel Great Again agenda. And I'm not going to read you the entire article here. I just want to give you some of the highlights. I really do hope that you will actually read it because I put a lot of effort into these articles. And the first part is the Ellisons and the Zionist takeover of TikTok. In part 2 of this article, I discussed how Trump ally Larry Ellison, who is, of course, the CEO of Oracle and the second richest person in the world, he kind of goes back and forth with Elon Musk, and how him, along with Silver Lake and Andreessen Horowitz, are part of a sort of cabal who are preparing to purchase TikTok as part of Trump's efforts to get TikTok under U.S. control. So according to the Wall Street Journal, if this deal goes through, the new company will be formed to run TikTok, and the U.S. will have 80% stake in the company, and the company will be dominated by a, quote, American-dominated board, including one member of the U.S. government. And so Larry Ellison is a big part of this. He's part of just this takeover of TikTok that we're witnessing. So that's kind of where I picked up on this, but it goes even deeper than this, because to understand the full implications of this deal, you need to understand that prominent politicians and conservative pundits previously warned that TikTok was not only spreading propaganda to millions of Americans using the app, but they specifically warned that it was damaging Israel's image in the post-October 7th, 2020 world. So, for example, you have the head executive of pro-Zionist Anti-Defamation League, who was heard on leaked audio complaining that there was a, quote, major TikTok problem. And he said that the opposition to Israel wasn't about left or right, but it was a sign of a generational shift as Gen Z turns against the policies of Israel. So this big Zionist is basically acknowledging that the Gen Z movement, Gen Z people in general, are turning against Israel. And I think that's kind of become very clear to most of us. It's only older conservatives pretty much, who are still diehard Zionists. Then you also have Craig Mockeber, who's the former director of the New York office of the UN High Commission on Human Rights. And he said that attempts to ban TikTok were an obvious effort to control the narrative around Israel. He said, quote, they are trying to use government power to force TikTok to be taken over by pro-Israel ownership to silence criticism of genocide and apartheid. This is in March 15, 2024. And another vocal critic of TikTok is Senator Marco Rubio, who has called for banning the app to stop spreading foreign propaganda. He told NBC News, quote, for some time I have been warning that communist China is capable of using TikTok's algorithm to manipulate and influence Americans. We've seen TikTok used to downplay the Uyghur genocide, the status of Taiwan, and now Hamas terrorism. And interestingly, you tie this all together, DropSite News, who's a great site that I encourage you to follow, they recently reported that Larry Ellison, head of Oracle, who's part of this attempted purchase of TikTok, was working with a former Israeli ambassador to the UN. His name is Ron Prosor. And in 2015, they were apparently emailing about Marco Rubio when Marco Rubio was considering running for president. And in 2015, on April 30th, 2015, this former UN ambassador for Israel sent a message to Larry Ellison, gave his phone number, thanked him for hanging out the evening before, and said, quote, "How was the conversation with Marco Rubio? Did he pass your scrutiny? Did you have a chance to talk about Israel? I would love to chat." And a few hours later, Ellison responded in the affirmative saying, "Hi, Ron, great meeting with Marco Rubio. I set him up to meet with Tony Blair," adding, quote, "Marco will be a great friend for Israel." So it's just kind of interesting that Marco Rubio's out here advocating for the purchase and the takeover of Israel because he says it's become anti-Israel. I mean, the purchase of TikTok because he says it's become anti-Israel. And at the same time, as far back as 2015, he was being vetted by Larry Ellison for his allegiances to Israel. And they mention Tony Blair. I set him up to meet with Tony Blair. Of course, Tony Blair is the former prime minister of the UK, who's also played an integral role in the promoting the interests of Israel. And we get to that in a moment. Now, Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he made it clear that he believes TikTok is a powerful tool for combating anti-Zionist sentiment. Just a couple of months ago in September, Netanyahu was meeting with a group of social media influencers in New York, and he said, quote, "Weapons change over time. The most important ones are on social media." And then he asked the group, what was the most important purchase at the time? And he said, TikTok. And so he clearly understands the value and the need to get TikTok to influence young minds. And of course, Larry Ellison himself, he is no stranger to supporting Israel. There's a 2014 interview, which has been recently circulating on social media. You guys probably saw it. The interview was recorded by an Israel Channel 10 reporter. And this was after Larry Ellison had donated $10 million to the nonprofit Friends of Israeli Defense Forces, FIDF. And when he was asked why he believes support of Israel is important, he put his allegiances to Israel on full display. He said, quote, "The renewal of the Jewish state is something that I think touches all of us. For 2,000 years, we are a stateless people, and now we have a country of our own, defended by all the brave men and women of the IDF. So anything we can do to support them, who devote their lives for preserving the state of Israel, keeping the people safe, and allowing our state to continue. I've been to Israel. I've been to the border. I've spent time with people who govern the state of Israel, and I feel a deep emotional connection to the state of Israel and the Israeli people." And his $10 million gift to the IDF was not the last one. In 2017, he gave the largest donation to the IDF in their history with a $16.6 million gift. And according to Truth Out, the outlet Truth Out, it says Friends of the IDF is a nonprofit organization that raises tens of millions of dollars annually to fund a range of programs that effectively subsidize the Israeli military. So billionaires like Larry Ellison, they donate to Friends of the IDF. Arnold Schwarzenegger's donated. Lots of different celebrities have donated. And then that money subsidizes the Israeli military. So altogether, Larry Ellison gave $26.6 million to the IDF through his investments. And this is the guy that's going to be involved with the takeover of Israel. And so then in that same 2014 interview, Ellison noted that Oracle, his company, they have two CEOs, himself and someone known Safra Katz, who he said was born in Israel. And he said, quote, "So again, we love the country of Israel and we will do everything we can to support the country of Israel," he reassured the reporter. And just to add even more kind of mystery here, in October, there was a hacked email from former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, who's also tied to Jeffrey Epstein, from his email account. And there was a conversation with this Safra Katz, who is Larry Ellison's fellow CEO. And in that, Larry Ellison's fellow CEO reassured the former Prime Minister of Israel that she was loyal to Israel and believed Americans needed to be conditioned to love Israel. She said, quote, in this email that was leaked, "We have all been horrified by the growth of the BDS movement," that's boycott, divest, sanction, in college campuses, and have concluded that we have to fight this battle before the kids even get to college. We believe that we have to embed the love and respect for Israel in the American culture. That means getting the message to the American people in a way they can consume it. So Larry Ellison has also downplayed the genocide and the tragedies happening in Israel. And he claimed that Israel did everything they could to minimize civilian casualties. Quote, "But we know one thing for certain, that the Israeli army did everything they could to minimize civilian casualties. And in that regard, they've done a much better job than a lot of other armies around the world throughout history." So this guy is literally just an unapologetic Israel apologist and supporter. Now, to add even more on top of this, Larry Ellison recently helped his son, David Ellison, who's the CEO of Skydance, purchase Paramount Global and merge it with Skydance. And now it's this new corporation called the Paramount Skydance Corporation, which was a $8 billion merger. And bringing those two companies together puts David Ellison, and of course his father's influence, in charge of Paramount streaming services, MTV, Comedy Central, CBS News, and CBS affiliate stations around the world. And now it's being reported that the younger Ellison is actually going to buy Warner Brothers Discovery. So he would be in charge of Paramount and all those CBS stations. He would be in charge of Warner Brothers Discovery, which was itself a combining of Discovery with Warner Brothers, as the name implies. And it goes on and from there. And just one more piece of the puzzle, the younger Ellison was recently exposed with some leaked emails from journalist Jack Paulson, which leaked emails from former Israeli Minister of Defense Benjamin Gantz, and they show that the younger Ellison was being recruited in December 2015 for an Israeli government counter-BDS initiative. Again, that stands for boycott, divest, and sanction. So with Larry Ellison set to gain control of TikTok and David Ellison quickly accumulating a media empire, with the Zionist forces within the Israeli government have successfully accomplished a coup over the American mind. In the coming years, the Ellisons will be an increasingly important tool for the Zionists to rehabilitate the crumbling image of Israel in the minds of Americans. Wow, that's a lot going on. I wrote this article and I'm like, oh my God, there's a lot here. One more piece of the puzzle that is relevant to current news, the Technocratic Gaza peace plan. If you follow me on social media or even in my recent videos, you guys have heard me talk about this peace plan that Trump announced. It is very much just all about putting Israel in control of Gaza. It is a Zionist plan. It is not a peace plan. It's very Orwellian named. In September, Trump announced a 20-point peace plan for Gaza to bring an end to the latest siege by Israel on the Palestinian people. The plan received immediate support from Netanyahu. While the plan was touted as a path to peace by Trump and Netanyahu, critics of the plan, including myself, say that it's basically just another attempt to control Palestinian territory by foreign interests. And while Trump was patting himself on the back for bringing peace, the Israeli military was continuing to attack the Palestinian people. So it never really stopped. There never was a ceasefire, despite what the corporate media and Zionist media wants you to believe. But one of the most worrisome aspects of the plan was point number 9, which made it perfectly clear that Trump and Netanyahu have what they have in mind for the future of Palestine. It reads, Gaza will be governed under the temporary transitional governance of a technocratic, apolitical Palestinian committee responsible for delivering the day-to-day running of public services and municipalities for the people in Gaza. Now, it goes on to say the committee will be made up of qualified Palestinians and international experts with oversight and supervision by a new international transitional body, the Board of Peace, which will be headed and chaired by Donald Trump and other members and heads of states to be announced, including former Prime Minister Tony Blair. Remember that? I mentioned that Marco Rubio had been sent to meet with Tony Blair by Larry Ellison when he was being vetted back in 2015 for his loyalty to Israel. And now, as we're seeing here, Tony Blair's popping up because his organization, the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, is extremely important to the Zionists, and he's working directly with Larry Ellison. So they're going to create this Board of Peace. What immediately catches the eye is the blatant mention of transitional governance by a technocratic apolitical committee. And while it could be argued that the use of technocratic is simply meant to imply a group of experts, the fact that this word is being used by an administration which is filled with acolytes of Peter Thiel and heavily influenced by technocrats is extremely telling. So for me, I don't think that was a mistake. They didn't just throw that word in there for no reason. This is a message that reveals that the technocratic class is going to be in charge of the fate of Palestine under Donald Trump. The other aspect is this Board of Peace. First, the idea that the president of the U.S. should have control and ultimate say over the future of Palestine is an affront to the Palestinian sovereignty and to their own destiny. It's also, again, another example that foreign powers, foreign interests are going to control the destiny of the Palestinian people. If, quote, as I wrote here, if there ever is to be a real peace for the Palestinians, they must be allowed to chart their own course and not rely on the goodwill of the Israelis, the Americans, or any other nations. And then we get into the Tony Blair aspect. So Tony Blair, he's not only responsible for dragging the UK into the U.S. war of terror under former President George Bush, but his ties to Larry Ellison are also a big concern. Ellison and Blair have a long relationship involving business and political ties. Just as Ellison has been the biggest donor to the IDF, he's also played a similar role for the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. Ellison has reportedly given $300 million to Tony Blair's institute, which has been used to advance the technocratic vision of merging government, corporations, and big tech. And a recent investigation by the New Statesman, Democracy for Sale, and Lighthouse Reports says that the Tony Blair Institute has become a, quote, global force working in at least 45 countries, employing other former heads of state, ex-ministers, and civil servants, and paying more than $1 million to its top owners. So they also found that Larry Ellison has donated to both the Tony Blair Institute for Change, for Global Change, and the Tony Blair Foundation through his own foundation, the Larry Ellison Foundation. So there's just deep ties between these ardent, strong Zionists. And they found that there is a symbiotic relationship between the Tony Blair Institute and Oracle, with the two entities holding joint retreats and one ex-employee characterizing them as inseparable. The outlets also compared the testimony with public documents and documents obtained by the UK's Freedom of Information laws. And altogether, they said that this data revealed, quote, an organization unusually close to the British government, holding regular meetings with ministers in which they push policy recommendations that serve Oracle's interests. And I didn't even get into this article. I got into it in previous articles, how Larry Ellison, you guys have probably seen the clips where he said the citizens will be on their best behavior because we'll be able to monitor everybody. Larry Ellison also, right after 9/11, wrote an opinion piece for the New York Times calling for there to be a digital national ID, calling for spying and monitoring on people. And he wanted his company, Oracle, of course, to be the ones to lead the change, not to mention that Oracle's first customer, much like Palantir and many other of these big tech firms, was the CIA itself. The reason this matters is because the Ellisons serve Israeli interests, as does Blair and Trump. The idea that this board of peace governed by Trump and Blair is going to support the autonomy and sovereignty of the Palestinians is a farce. And Trump's peace plan is actually going to be voted on today as I'm recording this. So by the time you guys have heard this, the vote will likely have happened. You can see here, U.S. proposal at the UN for Gaza stabilization. Force faces concerns from Russia, China, and the Arabs. So it doesn't have 100% support. China and Russia have the potential to veto because they do have a veto as members of the UN Security Council. But it is being voted on today. So that is basically what my article covers here. By the time you're hearing this, it will be published at thelastamericanvagabond.com. I encourage you guys to go read it, to share it, because unfortunately, this is just more evidence that what we're witnessing in Gaza and with the Trump administration is not about MAGA, Make America Great Again, America First, any of that, guys. It is truly, truly, truly a Make Israel Great Again agenda. This is truly just Donald Trump continuing to toe the line and do what the Israelis want, what the Zionists want. And is it any wonder then that there is an increase in spike and people calling out Zionist power or Jewish power more specifically? And I'm not somebody who kind of supports that or endorses that. In fact, I'm going to pull up something real quick I posted on social media this weekend, just for those of you to see. I believe that there's actually a psyop going on, that yes, there are more and more people waking up to Zionism and waking up to Israel. And at the same time, there is actually genuine anti-Semitism popping up. And I hate to even say that because we all know how the powers that wish they were, they love to just call everybody anti-Semitic, and it's a way to shut down people and to shut down critical thinking and to get people fired from their jobs. But I think that there is a psyop going on that, yes, people are waking up to Zionism, but then people like Nick Fuentes and others who genuinely do hate all Jews and maybe would use violence against them, they're being boosted by the algorithm. As I posted here, the focus on Jews and blaming all Jews for humanity's problems is another form of collectivist cancer. I support the fact that opposition to Zionism has grown. I don't support the collectivist labeling of an entire group of people. I see people as individuals always. So I just want to make that note, that I do think there is a rise and an increase in opposition to Zionism, which I certainly celebrate and appreciate. But I also think we need to be skeptical, guys, and watch out who you follow and who you listen to. Don't fall into another stupid trap that is just going to warp your brain. All right, I've got a couple of stories we're going to sort of breeze through before we get to our final story about Jeffrey Epstein. Just a couple of updates here. Palantir CEO says a surveillance state is preferable to China winning the AI race. Now, he didn't say it in those exact words. They are being a little bit hyperbolic with their title, but he certainly implied it. He also had strong opinions about people's God-given rights to eat a hot dog and flirt with someone who isn't their spouse. This is just a really, watch the actual show. It's actually, what's it called? There's a new book about him called The Philosopher in the Valley. And then Alex Karp, who is the head the CEO of at Palantir, along with Peter Thiel, of course. And you can find this. This is the interview on Axios. It's about 29 minutes long. If you want to go through that, I encourage you to watch it. This Gizmodo article here, it just sort of gives us some of the summaries. And he basically says that in order to stop China from building a surveillance state, the U.S. needs to do it, which is the same arguments that Elon Musk is making with AI. It's inevitable that there's going to be AI overlords, so we might as well do it first before the other guys do it. That's essentially that's all these people have is fear. They want to keep you afraid, tell you that the doom is inevitable. Don't oppose it. Don't try to fight it. Don't try to opt out or resist it. It's inevitable, guys. So we just need to accept it and do it first, or bad people are going to do it to us. Fuck that. Now, and another one, Apple launches digital ID, a way to carry your passport on your phone for use at TSA checkpoints. This was just announced over the last week. The feature known as digital ID was previously announced as part of the iOS 26 release and adds passports to the list of existing government IDs supported in the Apple Wallet. Using digital ID in Apple Wallet, users can create and present an ID even if they don't have a real ID compliant driver's license or state ID. The ID does not replace a physical passport, and it's not currently supported for international travel or crossing borders. But this is just another step in this direction, guys. Here's Apple's announcement. Let's look at it from themselves. Apple Services delivers powerful features and intelligent updates to users this fall. The introduction of digital ID. So it's happening, guys. Digital IDs are coming. They're marching forward, and Apple is part of it. Google's already got their own version. It won't be long before others are doing the same. And wouldn't you know it, the New York Times is kind of all about it. What's a digital passport and how does it work? They wrote this really simple and helpful article just in case anybody needed to be nudged towards digital ID. Apple joined Google this week in allowing travelers to add their passports to their cell phone wallets. As the holiday travel season nears, here's what you need to know. Oh, thank you, New York Times. You certainly care about us. Now, they go through the whole thing. They talk about mobile driver's licenses, which I've been reporting on, that I think mobile driver's licenses, MDLs, or digital driver's licenses are going to be the first way that digital ID is truly introduced to the United States. Now, thankfully, they just added this section at the end. Are there privacy concerns? While these innovations can help make travel more seamless, some privacy experts have raised concerns. Oh, thank you. Jay Stanley, a senior policy analyst at the ACLU, said that while the developments were framed as more convenient than physical ID documents, his concern was that they were creating a digital identity that can be more easily tracked online. He said that current privacy standards were inadequate to meet these new technologies and worried that people were set to face an explosion of identity demands, such as websites requiring you to scan an ID to access instead of simply inputting your birthday, which is more common. When it comes to travel, he said that many privacy advocates felt that they have lost the battle when it comes to protecting their identities of those who fly, with increased measures like biometrics. But for forms of travel that did not previously require ID, such as train and bus travel, he worries that a digitized ID would create more demand for showing identification. Digital ID documents, he said, quote, really could become tantamount to a virtual ankle monitor for everybody. So we're going to keep following that. And of course, if you haven't visited the Conscious Resistance recently, I just want to point out that I have, we did a Independent Media Alliance panel recently. I called it Digital ID, Where is Your Line in the Sand? Last week, I talked about digital IDs for climate change. I was also recently on Hakeem Anwar's show talking about it. And I interviewed Hakeem about his new report on digital IDs. The report on my website is called This Might Be the Most Important Report on Digital IDs You Need to See. So we've been covering this quite a bit extensively. If you need to get caught up, visit theconsciousresistance.com and you'll get everything that you need to know there. All right, let's go to our next story. This one I think is important and not being focused on enough. I always have a soft spot for any indigenous resistance, and so I try to highlight it where I can. Indigenous activists storm COP30 climate summit in Brazil, demanding action. Protests come as Brazil's leader Lula says COP30 participants should be inspired by indigenous peoples. And you can see here, you may have seen videos of this. There were some indigenous peoples from the Amazon jungle coming to COP30 in Brazil. It's being held in the city Belém. And they basically were like, look, the meeting claims to be open to indigenous voices, but we're not actually being heard. We're not actually being allowed in there. Gilmar, this man, what was his name here? Gilmar, I think that's all they gave him, indigenous leader from the Tupinamba community near the lower reaches of the Tapajos River in Brazil, said, "We can't eat money. We want our lands free from agribusiness, oil exploration, illegal miners, and illegal loggers." So a group of protesters, they breached security barriers at the main entrance of COP, causing minor injuries to two security staff and minor damage to the venue. Again, you may have seen videos of some of these clashes. There have been some really big protests outside of COP30 while all the presidents and all the politicians are flying there in their private jets. The indigenous people feel that they are being ignored. And you had this one. You cannot make climate policies without indigenous people at the negotiation table. Indigenous activist flotilla just sailed the entire length of the Amazon River to take their message to COP30 at the climate conference. And so, again, for me, because I am a discerning person and critically thinking person, I don't have to necessarily believe all the climate garbage and propaganda to support these people's right to be heard. Because the fact of the matter is that the Amazon rainforest is being logged by big agribusiness, by oil companies, and people like Trump and others want to continue to expand some of those industries, including the cattle industry, and including soybeans and others, which are part of the reason that the Amazon rainforest is being logged. And so these indigenous people are basically saying, like, look, our voices are not being heard, our rights are not being guaranteed, and they're standing up for themselves. And I can get behind that and I can support that, especially if they feel the need to go out there and violently clash with the cops to make a scene and be heard. So that one was out there. You might have seen some clips. Here's another one from earth.org. Despite record turnout, only 14% of indigenous Brazilians are expected to access decision-making spaces at COP30. So the UN loves to say we're going to have indigenous people's voices at the table. And sure, they do have a few people there. And I'm not saying those people's voices don't matter. But the vast majority of indigenous tribes and peoples are ignored in these type of UN events. So there are indigenous campaigners, including something called the People's Circle, which is an umbrella group of Afro-Brazilian, indigenous, and traditional communities, which have been protesting and the COP30 since it first kicked off last week. And just to kind of add a little bit more here, indigenous leaders press UN climate summit to turn pledges into policy. As COP30 unfolds in Brazil, a record number of indigenous participants are pushing for land rights, climate financing, and a concrete say in issues facing their territories. And so you can see there are indigenous people standing outside. So the UN likes to make a big deal and act like everybody's voice is being heard and they care about the people. But there are clearly many people in the Amazon rainforest and in Brazil and South America and Central America in general who feel like their voices are not being heard. Here's another one. Cloido Tenharim, 40-year-old man who left his village in southern Amazon on November 1st. He said, "We're here with the same goal of securing our rights. With so much diversity among the peoples who are here, not only from Brazil, I can say that cultural diversity changes, but what unites us is our connection with nature." So all the indigenous people are kind of coming together. And in the blue zone at COP30, the global indigenous delegation, which includes about 900 participants, nearly triple the previous edition. So there's 900 participants being represented. And according to Sonia Guajajara, Brazil's Minister of Indigenous People, COP has the highest participation and leadership of indigenous people. We want to keep working so that indigenous participation in the blue zone grows. So it's not just a physical presence, and the issue is at the center of global debate. But as I shared last year when we were talking about the Summit for the Future and the Pact for the Future, which the UN signed in September of 2024, indigenous voices were being left out of that fight as well, and they continue to be. So I don't just blindly take their word for it when they say that, well, yeah, we've got more participants. It's one thing to have some token native people on site, some token indigenous people on site. It's a whole nother thing if they actually have a say and if they can be heard and have some voting power. I mean, have a say in their lands, because what we know is going to happen is that the vast majority of the world's leaders are going to be voting, and just like they're doing with Palestine, they're going to hold a vote. They're going to fly home with their private jets, and these decisions are going to go forward, and they're going to affect the lives of these people, whether they have any say or not. So again, I don't have to believe in the climate change narrative to support indigenous people, their resistance, their opposition to these conferences and these sort of show trials that are claiming to care about indigenous people. I stand with the indigenous people of this planet. I stand with all indigenous people around the planet, even when I know we don't have the same politics, because these are the First Nations people and their voices need to be heard. And one other finer point on that, before we go to our final story and talk about Jeffrey Epstein, I just want to make this important note. For those who don't understand, we are all indigenous to somewhere on the planet. It doesn't matter what color skin you have, you're brown, white, black, yellow, red, whatever color you want to give yourself. We are all indigenous to this planet, one place or another. Our parents, our ancestors came from somewhere, whether that's back in Europe, back in Africa, elsewhere. And the sooner we recognize that, I think the sooner the earth and the humanity will move towards a better place, because then we can reconnect to the planet. We can reconnect to ourselves and to understand that, we all have to fight for this planet. We need to reject things like Agenda 2030 and these false kind of faux environmental green movements. But that doesn't mean we have to ignore the planet. We have to ignore our connection to this earth, because no matter what your spirituality, your religion is, or lack thereof, the Creator put us on this planet for a reason. And for me, as I have tattooed here on my arms, I am an earth warrior. I believe in defending this planet. I defend the animals and the peoples, and that is very important to me. So I hope more and more of you out there will spend time and get connected to nature and find that, because it's important. So yeah, let's go ahead, get ready for our next story. Before we do that, though, I want to remind you guys, if you ever want to support me, The Conscious Resistance, one of the best places to do that is at our website. Go buy some of our shirts. We've got 8 different shirt designs right now. Liberate all life for the vegans in the crowd, the animal lovers. Revolution without healing is a recipe for disaster. You are a creator. You are beautiful. You are powerful. You are free. The Conscious Resistance. No masters, no slaves. Holistic anarchism. $25 each. They ship all around the world, and support us there and allow me to continue to do my work. And also you get to spread the message, right? Because I've heard from so many people that these shirts are great conversation starters. So go ahead and pick yourself one up at theconsciousresistance.com, guys. Check out our shirts tab or the books if you want to support by buying a book. You may have heard that last week there was some new Epstein files released. Just a quick catch up for those who missed it. First, it started with the Democrats releasing just 3 emails from Jeffrey Epstein's files, which came from the Jeffrey Epstein estate. And it was obvious they chose to release a couple emails which mentioned Trump to try to make Trump look bad. And then in response to that, the Republican-controlled House Oversight Committee, they released 20,000 emails, which is obviously a lot. And I hate the way they release these emails. They use a Google Drive. There's multiple folders. None of it is, there's no descriptions of anything. So you have to download the whole file if you can. And I know a lot of people are feeding it to AI to try to get, data points from it. But those emails came out, and first what happened is the conservatives respond to the original emails released by the Democrats. Let's go ahead and look at this headline from, I think it's the New York Times. Conservative media picks an Epstein storyline and sticks with it. Right-wing outlets have focused on a single redacted name and the 23,000 pages of correspondence related to Jeffrey Epstein that were released on Wednesday. And so what they're referring to is that there was a mention of Donald Trump in one of these emails, and it said something about a victim, and the victim's name was redacted, and it's largely believed that it was Virginia Giuffre, who has previously said that Trump wasn't involved in anything. But in the email, Epstein says that Trump was around this redacted victim, and they spent a lot of time together. And so the right wing and MAGA basically focused on that and said, see, this is all just a hoax. The Democrats are just trying to make Trump look bad. We all know this was Virginia Giuffre, and they redacted the name just so that people would think it's something new. But we all know she didn't do anything, that she didn't point any finger at Trump. So they say here, the right wing argued that Democrats on the House Oversight Committee, who had released 3 emails early on Wednesday, had created a false narrative by hiding one of the names of Epstein's victims. The redaction, the theory went, was meant to cover up Virginia Giuffre had previously said that she had never witnessed Trump involved in sexual abuse of minors. And they have a Newsmax anchor says this was done intentionally. This is how sick and twisted people are. They are vile creatures. This is what we're up against. In the dependably administration-friendly world of conservative media, the question of how to address the president's relationship with Epstein has been particularly thorny. So they just go here and says, the unified response to this week's disclosure shows how closely aligned right-wing media voices are with elected Republicans and the degree to which the two share storylines and provide each other political cover. And it goes on. Why did the Democrats cover up the name? Democrats are trying to create a fake narrative to slander President Trump. The White House jumped in the conversation. The unnamed victim referenced in the emails is late Virginia Giuffre, who repeatedly said Trump was not involved in any wrongdoing whatsoever. But what they basically did is they ignored the other 20,000 emails that have come out, and they just focused on that one and said, hey, guys, nothing to see here. Look, they redacted Virginia Giuffre, so we all know there's nothing here. And you got this idiot who goes by Gunther Eagleman, real name David Freeman, said so far they have proved nothing negative against President Trump, saying this to his 1.6 million followers. Now, the Democrats say that this is just standard policy to redact the names of victims. And so there wasn't any funny business going on. But obviously the Republicans, they found their talking point. Ha, ha, ha. Democrats are dumb. And you got Tim Pool on it. Democrats tried to frame Donald Trump and got caught the same day. It is insane. I cannot stand Tim Pool. He's such a fucking idiot. Okay, so that was the first thing, is the emails come out and Republicans just seize on this one thing, and then they ignore everything else. Well, what was the everything else? What else was in these emails? Newly released emails reveal Epstein kept a close eye on Trump. This is very interesting. I haven't seen anybody else talk about this. Apparently, Epstein was literally tracking everywhere Trump was flying. On November 25th, 2016, just weeks after Trump won the presidential election, Epstein's pilot wrote, Trump is still scheduled to depart Sunday between 4 and 6. Let me know if we are firm for Wheels Up Saturday at 6 p.m. still. Epstein says, I'll let you know tomorrow morning. Other emails track Trump's movements more generally. Epstein receives a heads up on December 2017. Trump's in our neighborhood today. Looks like he's going to 740 Park for a fundraiser. The sender's name was redacted, but it was signed by Richard Kahn, who is Epstein's accountant. One visitor waiting outside Epstein's home made a joke about Trump while waiting to get inside. He said, I'm at the door, but I'll wait for my time. I don't want to come early to find Trump in your house. Sending 2 smiling emojis. And there's just more and more evidence, for one, that Steve Bannon, who was very close to Trump, was very close to Epstein as well. And they had a lot of correspondence. And of course, there's correspondence from Larry Summers. There's others. And in one of the emails, as I'll show you guys in a moment, Epstein claimed that Trump, Bill Clinton had nothing to do with it. Here's what I wrote. A few things that stand out in these latest Epstein releases. Epstein says Bill Clinton never visited his island. Peter Thiel and Epstein were absolutely communicating despite Thiel's continued denials. An email from a guest visiting Epstein says, I'm at the door. That's the one I just read. 4, Epstein said he was the only one who could bring Trump down. So there's some pretty interesting things here, but I find it curious that Epstein was literally just tracking Trump everywhere he went. Epstein received multiple updates from his pilot about Trump's movements during the years covered by the releases. Updated president-elect schedule. This is after Trump had been elected but not in office yet. Trump plane to arrive at Orlando at 5 p.m. Friday for the event. Then Palm Beach, estimated 10 p.m. He usually runs late, so 11 p.m. could be realistic for his PBI arrival. I'll keep you posted if time changes. On September 2017, I hear President Trump arrives in St. Thomas on Tuesday, FYI. In November of that year, Epstein discussed an apparent planned trip to Little St. James, his island. He says, at the moment, we will go to Little St. James on Sunday, the 26th, early, then to New York, where I will stay the week. He told his pilot, Trump is in town that week. There's nothing in the email suggesting that they met, but still, it's like, why is he mentioning Trump so often and kind of keeping track with where Trump's at? You know, a speculative conspiracy theorist might wonder if they actually were meeting at some of those points and just keeping it secret. Who knows? Here's some more. Jeffrey Epstein, a newly released email, says Trump knew about the girls. The new emails, here we go. Trump says he asked me to resign. Never, ever a member, ever. This is Epstein writing in 2019, before he got arrested, shortly before, writing to Michael Wolff. And of course, Michael Wolff is the controversial journalist who has a lot of information about Epstein, and he claims he's got tapes that he hasn't released. And he was clearly giving Epstein advice. And so a lot of people have focused on that. Look, Michael Wolff, this journalist, is advising Epstein. You know, I think that's one way to look at it. I think another way to look at it is he was trying to get Epstein to be friendly with him so that he could get as much information out of him as possible. You know, I think that's another way. Again, that's a charitable view. But what's most important to me here, Epstein wrote in an email in 2011 to Maxwell that Trump was a, quote, dog that hasn't barked, and what appeared to mean that Trump had not disclosed details about Epstein's activities. Now, of course, MAGA media and QAnon media are spinning this to mean Trump was an informant and he didn't bark because he was he was secretly an informant for the FBI against the Epstein. There's no evidence of that, despite what Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, said and then later retracted. There's no evidence that Epstein was an informant. And of course, as you guys can imagine, so many people are using my interview with Brad Edwards, the attorney, as they always do, to try to say that Trump is completely absolved of all things. Epstein mentioned Trump multiple times in private emails show. So there's so many mentions of Trump in these emails. Again, he was the dog that hasn't barked. And then this one is kind of just weird here. Talking about, do you like kids? And there's one point where one of the guys that Epstein talked to Epstein says something like, take a picture with the child, make me smile. And this was a former, I think he was a former ambassador to Syria. Man, I want to pull that one up real quick because we gotta highlight that one. So let's look at see what the CIA says over at Google. Make me smile, Epstein. What we know about Epstein's emails. Okay, here we go. Epstein asked Trump's ambassador, this is Trump's current ambassador to Turkey. Epstein asked Trump's ambassador to Ankara to, quote, make me smile with photos of you and child. Send photos of you and child. Make me smile. To Tom Barak, who is, again, the U.S. ambassador to Turkey under Trump right now. Send photos of you and child. Make me smile. I don't know what the hell that means, but none of us think it means anything good. That's not good. That doesn't sound good. It doesn't feel good. And then I just want to point this out because I came across this when I was preparing for the show. I think this is a underreported sort of missed story. Stacey Williams says Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein coordinated groping incident. This is more than a year old. Former model said of an incident at Trump Tower in 1993, I was rolled in there like a piece of meat in some kind of twisted game. How many of you have seen this one? Because this seems to be, I guess it's just one woman's testimony from something that happened 40 years ago, 30 years ago, but it's still something. It's still, a story worth pursuing. In her first detailed on-camera interview since discussing assault allegations with The Guardian, Stacey Williams, former model, told CNN that she recalled former President Trump, this is when he wasn't in office, and Epstein smiled at each other as the property mogul was feeling her up, which gave her the impression the entire incident was coordinated. He says, the second he was in front of me, he pulled me into his hands and his hands were just on me and didn't come off. She's talking about Trump, of course. Then the hands started moving on the side of my breast, on my hips, my back, down to my butt, back up, sort of. They were just on me the whole time and I froze. Williams briefly dated Epstein in the 1990s. So now I know some people will say this came out in October 2024, right before the election, and it's just a Democratic hit piece meant to make Trump look bad right before the election. But I don't know. I think that these types of stories, you can't really ignore them, my friends. I'm not saying that there's hard evidence that Trump was directly involved in anything illegal per se, but with everything we know about Trump and his history of modeling agencies, the accusations, and his own words to Howard Stern and others about going into the rooms with the models and being able to check them out and look at them and different things like that. And also as I've covered, the modeling to sexual assault pipeline, whether you're talking about Jean-Luc Bonel and his M2 modeling agency in France, or the other modeling agencies, Jean Casablanca, who is also a friend of Donald Trump. I have a whole nother video I'm going to do on that soon. But so this thing has been blowing up, and Trump is, of course, calling it a hoax. But as it has gotten so big, they can no longer deny it. And as the latest Democrat was sworn in, the 218th signature on Thomas Massey's petition to force a vote on the release of the Epstein files, Trump has now gone full on attacking Marjorie Taylor Greene. President Trump just attacked me and lied about me. I haven't called him at all, but I did send these text messages today. Apparently, this is what sent him over the edge, the Epstein files. And of course, he's coming after me hard to make an example to scare all Republicans before next week's votes to release the Epstein files. It's astonishing, really, how hard he's fighting to stop the Epstein files from coming out, that he actually goes to this level. But really, most Americans wish he would fight this hard to help the forgotten men and women of America who are fed up with foreign wars and foreign causes and are going broke trying to feed their families and are losing hope of ever achieving the American dream. This is what I voted for. I have supported Trump with too much of my precious time, too much of my own money, and fought even harder for him when almost all other Republicans turned their back and denounced him. But I don't worship or serve Donald Trump. I worship God. Jesus is my savior. I remain the same today as I've always been. I will continue to pray for this administration because the American people desperately deserve what they voted for. And she's getting support from some people, people who are saying we stand with you. And then there's other people just talking shit, calling her a leftist, calling her, I can't believe that you are selling out Trump, blah, blah, blah. But she's speaking up. And as this article says here from Thomas Massie, he got tired of me winning. How Thomas Massie outmaneuvered Trump on Epstein. So this vote on the Epstein files is supposed to come as soon as, I think, tomorrow, Tuesday. And Trump says, I don't care. And actually, as of just today, Monday, Trump is now calling for the release of the Epstein files. Basically, Speaker Mike Johnson and Trump are having to acknowledge that they lost. They fucking lost. The people want the Epstein files out. And Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna have been pushing for a bipartisan effort to get these files out. And Marjorie Taylor Greene's been supporting them. And Trump's been resisting. And he lost. The noise is not going away. So despite what Trump is trying to pretend that now he's all for the investigation, let it never be forgot that Donald Trump fought tooth and nail to keep people from finding the truth about whatever's going on with Epstein. And it might not even be that Donald Trump is implicated in something illegal. It could just be that he doesn't want to embarrass any of his powerful and wealthy friends. But nevertheless, here we go. It's about to happen, guys, this vote. And I know some of my more skeptical black-pilled audience members will say, Derrick, this is all a distraction. Everything's always a distraction to some of you folks. Some of us are capable of thinking about more than one thing at once. And so not everything's a distraction from something else. Yes, sometimes there are distractions that come in the media to keep us off our focus. But I think some of us are capable of thinking, deeper than that. And we can actually think for ourselves. So not everything is a distraction. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean I have hope in Thomas Massie or Marjorie Taylor Greene. I think they might likely be propped up as the new hope, right? They're going to probably run for president, maybe even come together. Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massie campaigning in 2028 against J.D. Vance and the other swamp creatures from the Democrats or whatever. And it's just going to keep more people playing the political game over and over. And I also don't have hope that whatever files come out are going to reveal some grand truth, because any real grand truth about Epstein, it's either already out in the public. We know he was deeply connected to intelligence from Israel, or it's been long destroyed. So while I don't have hopes that this is going to lead to some great awakening and we're going to get information we've never seen before and it's going to bring down the pedophile network, I still do celebrate it, guys. This issue is not going to die. It's not going to go away. I also want to share this article from Jacobin, which is a left-wing socialist outlet for those who can't handle that. But this is a good a look at Donald Trump, Jeffrey Epstein, and Israel. I think that's worth your time and worth reading. So check that out if you want to. And then one other talking point I wanted to mention, one of the other false talking points I'm seeing circulating from MAGA about the Epstein emails is that the Democrats sat on them for years and could have released them. However, these emails that were released last week, they were recently subpoenaed from the Epstein estate. So these are new emails that they've only recently received. But both the Democrats and the Republicans could have subpoenaed the Epstein estate years ago if they really wanted to. So the truth is, both sides are complicit in the cover-up and the delay of truth about Jeffrey Epstein. It's the facts. Both sides are connected to pedophiles. It's not a left-wing deep state, as Donald Trump has tried to get his followers to believe. It's not explicitly a right-wing deep state either. It is a deep state made up of banking interests, made up of warmongers' interests, made up of secret societies, made up of Jewish power, made up of Freemasons, made up of Jesuits, made up of Zionists and technocrats. There's a lot of people that make up the predator class, or what I call the pyramid of power. And if you're just learning about this, you can watch my 17-part documentary series at thepyramidofpower.net. But ultimately, we are not going to get some grand truth coming out of this Jeffrey Epstein, this latest cycle of Jeffrey Epstein documents. That's not what I believe is about to happen. I think that some good things will come out of it. Some more truths might be revealed, but the grand truth isn't going to come out because, unfortunately, my friends, the system is controlled by pedophiles and by murderers and by abusers and by psychopaths. That is why we can't win in the political system, because they have control of that. And to believe that Thomas Massie, Marjorie Taylor Greene, AOC, Gavin Newsom, Bernie Sanders, anybody else you want to throw at it, JD Vance, is going to fix the system, especially when the people are directly tied to the people running the system, is just fantasy. It's naive. It's childish. We need to be able to wake up and say, you know what? We have to take care of our own lives. And I know that's scary for many of you out there to think that. You're like, well, I want somebody to come save me, Derrick. That taking care of my own life, that sounds like I got to think. That sounds like I might have to actually do some work. That's kind of tough. I'd rather just vote for somebody to come save my life and do things for me. I don't think that's in the cards, my friends. I think, unfortunately, our destiny as free, powerful, and beautiful people is to reclaim our power, our sovereignty, to demand it, to stand up for it, and to fight for it for the coming 7 generations and beyond. Because if we don't, then we know what's coming. Technocracy, digital IDs, false revolutions, color revolutions, pedophiles continuing to run the world. We need to stand up. We need to recognize that politics isn't the answer. Donald Trump's not the answer. Elon Musk's not the answer. It's you. You, my friends. It's me. It's you and me, and it's always been us. It's the same answer it's always been. But we got to step up and we got to claim it. All right, guys, I think I've said enough for today. I want to remind you, if you'd like to support my work, go to theconsciousresistance.com/invest, theconsciousresistance.com/invest. You can find my Substack there, my Buy Me a Coffee, my P.O. Box, my crypto addresses if you'd like to support. As always, you can keep up with all of my latest content at theconsciousresistance.com. I want to encourage you to read my new article coming out from TLAV, the Technocratic Trump administration, the Zionist infiltration expands, and of course, invite you to go to civil.com/TCR. As you can see there on screen, we're doing the 10-week opt-out challenge. It started on October 15th. It's running through the end of the year. So if you sign up on Civil, you get all of those recordings, all that data, all that knowledge that I've been sharing and John Bush has been sharing. It'll be available to you. So I hope you guys will go over there and check it out because they're doing great work, and I want to continue to support people who do great work. All right, guys, we're going to end with a song as we always do. Bring the vibe up here. This is from Prezence, my brother Prezence, who will be playing at the People's Reset in Morelia 2 months from now, January 28th to February 2nd. In Morelia, Mexico, beautiful historic city that I love and live in, and there's just going to be so much going on. There's going to be hundreds of freedom-minded people. There's going to be talks and workshops and concerts and ceremonies and just community and connection. And if you need that, if you're sitting at home feeling kind of isolated and alone with the state of the world, make the effort, my friend. Tickets are only $222. I know that's a lot for some people, but it's a commitment. It's an investment in yourself. And you probably spend that much buying Starbucks coffee or going to the bar or on Netflix or Amazon. Set that aside, invest in yourself, come to the People's Reset, fly down to Mexico, have a great time, get inspired, get activated, go home and build a better world. Find out more about the People's Reset at thepeoplesreset.org. And if you can't make it in person, you can stream the entire event for free. So go to thepeoplesreset.org, learn more. And for now, let's hear Prezence featuring Octurus. This song is called Bloom. It's a good vibe. I hope you enjoy it. As always, my friends, remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free. Peace.
Moving consciously, and then we know it's time to freedom of our mind, and then we know it's time to moving consciously, and then we know it's time to freedom of our mind, and then we know it's time to head first. We facing our reality. Once a dream created actuality, and we will not go quietly. The crystal temple body in vitality. Awareness of our actions in morality. Acceptance of this earthly realm duality. Appreciating nature in her majesty. Freedom of our mind, and then we know
I see the truth inside my mind, that what we do to realign our soul and mind are one with I, breathing in the field of time. So bloom, like the flowers of the earth, it's time to bloom. Take our power back from curse, it's time to bloom. Open up the petals of creation, no more chasing, no more wasting. Life is sacred, so take a minute and let it sink in. Just for living, you know that you love. Careful what's given and sent from above. To let our spirit descend to the body. We lift up our sin like a dove. No regret in the soul is made perfect. Even our words can't be reversed. And love is the birth, we don't need a church. Even in mothers, you live in the earth. Awaken the dream and live in the seasons. Let your vibration be what you believe, and live like a in the Garden of Eden.
Haters we face in our reality. Once a dream created actuality. And we will not go quietly. The crystal temple body in vitality. Awareness of our actions in morality. Acceptance of this earth beyond duality. Appreciating nature in her majesty. Freedom of our mind, and then we know it's time to learn from our mistakes. We moving forward. Power versus force. The map is in the head, but in the heart, the compass my true north. Singing this song to resonate my throat and cast a spell for growth. United the heads and hearts of those who seek the passion and the flow. We moving consciously, and then we know it's time to bloom in this your light, and know that no one is coming to save you. I realize that only I hold keys to my own cage, and likewise you're the only one to make sure that you're not a slave. We moving consciously, my people, wake up, shape up, moving the body and mana and pranayama. Stay hydrated and shake the snakes and parasites from in the gut, and only then you'll have the juice to take the ones outside of you. Freedom of our mind, and then we know it's time to moving consciously, and then we know it's time to freedom of our mind, and then we know it's time to moving consciously, and then we know it's time to freedom of our mind, and then we know it's time to moving consciously, and then we know it's time to freedom of our mind, and then we know it's time to moving consciously, and then we know it's time to freedom of our mind, and then we know it's time to moving consciously, and then we know it's time to freedom of our mind, and then we know it's time to moving consciously, and then we know it's time to moving consciously, and then we know it's time to moving consciously, and then we know it's time to moving consciously, and then we know it's time to
Since 2012, the Conscious Resistance Network has been an independent media organization focused on empowering individuals through education, philosophy, health, and community organizing. We work to create a world where corporate and state power do not rule over the lives of free human beings. Our motto is leading by example and helping others in their pursuit of freedom. Visit theconsciousresistance.com to find our articles, documentaries, interviews, podcasts, books, and more. Remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free.